they sell trespassing privileges for $20,000 to $50,000, and the tag is free. The tags that Fish and Game give them for free, and that's how they get around that. So people that are well-heeled are going to these areas. Bennett Mountain is a very good example on the way out of Mountain Home down towards Glens Ferry. Probably the second biggest elk in the state live there, but you got to pay a fortune to get one.
Pat, thank you for coming today. I appreciate you, sir.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate being here.
I'm glad we were able to finally turn on the cameras. I mean, we've been sitting here chatting for well over an hour. So you worked with Fish and Game for some time. You were also a lobbyist with Fish and Game for the Idaho State Legislature. You lead hunting trips. You're an avid outdoorsman, all kinds of things. You're integral in managing the wolves in Idaho when they were passed over to the Fish and Game. I mean, just go. Like, let's talk about it. You've been at boots on the ground in Idaho wildlife and Fish and Game and all of the management for like 3 to 4 decades.
Well, it was kind of interesting. I was a high school teacher, and I started teaching high school when I was 22, and went back to my alma mater, and several of the teachers there are going, "Oh no, not you." But that's where I met my wife as a competing tennis coach, and I tell her that she infiltrated, learned my coaching secrets. But anyway, the gist of the story is I was teaching the top 5% of high school kids in advanced placement biology, and the goal was to get them smart enough that they could go to college and not have to take the first full year of biology.
Yeah.
But it also made me pretty sharp. So there were 400 people that applied for 5 positions in Fish and Game, and I got the highest score of all of them because I was doing that right now, and they had a lot of technical questions in there. Plus, they had things like, what's the oil mixture in a 4-cycle motor? Well, most people would go, 2 to 1 or whatever. Well, there is no oil mixture in a 4-cycle motor. And
I was going to say, that's only 2-stroke, right?
And then which molts first, then adult male bird, a juvenile male, an adult female, or a juvenile female. And I knew that it was juvenile males because I had pigeons. I had raised homing pigeons for 40 years, and juvenile males might molt. They molt first, and so nobody else would have got that right. They had a 1 in 4 chance. Well, I knew it immediately.
Gotcha. So
yeah.
So
anyway, that's why I got and then they liked me when in the interview. The next thing I know, we're heading to Idaho Falls to become a Fish and Game enforcement officer in Idaho Falls.
So enforcement is one of the big pieces that I was speaking with Burke Mantell, who's great, and he was telling me about an enforcement issue where somebody had called on their neighbor for going hunting the week before the season started. Or something. Had a deer strung up in the garage. Enforcement guy goes out, writes a ticket, gets a call the next day from the person who called initially saying, "You went to the wrong house. You went to the house next door." And he's like, "Damn it." So it's, people do have a propensity to just step outside of what the regulations are that Fish and Game set forth. What was it like enforcing them? Because you're essentially the law enforcement arm of the Fish and Game Department. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
Well, it was really interesting. The lesser the violation, the more people are willing to do that, like an overlimit of fish or an overlimit of birds or opening the season early or after it's closed. The majority of your violations were hunting and fishing, small game, or licenses or whatever I said. But then during the elk season and the deer season, they would really get with it, and you'd be working on complex cases. And I remember one year, we documented that in the Idaho Falls area, people shot and left 19 moose that they shot during elk season. And for some reason or another, they think a black animal is twice as big as an elk is an elk. And they were shooting them and leaving them like crazy. But one of the funny stories about that, where these guys shot a moose and they took some of the meat, and then we got a call and went out and looked, and sure enough, a moose had been poached and a bunch of meat taken off it, but there was a camera over there on a log. I went, oh. And so they took pictures of themselves with the moose, and they all had, the three guys all had a hat with the name of an automobile dealership in Burley, Idaho. So we went down there and showed the manager these three people and arrested them all because they left their camera there. So sometimes you do get lucky on people that do naughty things, but the estimation is that in the trophy species, moose, goats, and sheep, more are killed unlawfully than are killed lawfully every year. And people are willing to take the chance because you might be 50 if you start at 20 before you ever draw a bighorn sheep tag or a goat tag. So they're willing to take the chance to get caught. And back in the days when I worked for Fish and Game, a thing like shooting a deer at night, the fine was only $200, maybe $300 if the judge was really upset. Well, it was worth it to people to take the chance. So one of the things that I did when I got to the legislature is we got the laws changed to increase the penalties dramatically for taking animals out of season, and taking trophy animals was another thing on top of it. But you would find the head of the Ohio Ducks Unlimited chapters came to Idaho, and we caught him with 47 ducks over the limit because the man at a little place called Mud Lake, where they were staying in the motel there, called us and told us he was coming through and he had way too many ducks. Or another guys that we caught from Utah came into one of our areas where we plant a whole lot of trout, and when we checked them, they had like 84 over the limit. And so you get some of those really big ones. What you normally have is a guy that's a dummy that'll come through the check station, and he had a sage grouse and a hen pheasant, and he thought they were the same thing. And I mean, that's a dummy. And then you'll have the guy that is opportunist that will take a chance when he sees it. And the ones that we really wanted to get were the hardcore poachers. And to give you an example, a pickup came through one of our check stations with a man and a woman with Florida plates. Had a freezer, a chest freezer in the back of the pickup, and they were really, really nervous. So we had to look in that freezer, and it ended up when we put all the parts together, they had killed and taken the back straps and the hindquarters off 27 deer.
Wow.
And so that's the guy you really want to catch. So
do you think they drove up from Florida with that express intent? They were just driving home?
Oh, yeah. Well, the funny thing about that was he used his call. You get one call before you go see the judge, and the guy couldn't come up with the $16,000 for bail. Sure. So he finally talked to the bailiff to calling his wife. And he said, well, he needs $16,000, and his traveling companion, Susie Q, needs $10,000 bond. And she says, traveling companion? Pow! And the phone went down.
It wasn't his wife.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. We've laughed about that for 20 years.
God, man, you got busted a lot of different ways. Oh, that's bad. So for the people, you have obviously people coming from out of state, but for the people that were living in state, did you find that the people that were fipping on the rules were predominantly doing it to supply themselves with actual food, or were they doing it for sport?
Sport. Yeah. The ones that people that they don't violate, if you're going to get a doe deer or a cow elk or whatever, when they see something really, really big, then they're going to probably take a chance. Like we have fake deer now that the tail wiggles and the head turns and the eyes blink. And we put it out on Blacks Creek Road on the Mountain Home Freeway and put 30-inch rack on it. And 9 of the 10 vehicles that came by shot it. After hours when it's pitch black. 9 out of 10. Now you put a 2-point rack on that and 1 out of 10 will shoot it after hours. But the thought of getting a great big trophy is more important. But to me, if I didn't get it legally and could tell a real story about it, I would feel dirty putting it on the wall. But 9 out of 10 wouldn't have felt dirty because they shot it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually saw a documentary on that years ago and saw the, mechanical deer, and then, guy shoots it from his car, and then agents pop out and they're like, hey, whoa, stop.
The funniest one, besides shooting 9 out of 10 there, was a guy pulled up to the deer, which is on the left side of the road, and his wife was in the right-hand side. And she leaned out and shot it with a muzzle loader, but she didn't get her barrel outside the window. Wow. And so the whole cab is full of smoke, and the guy's got his hands over his ears, and he's screaming bloody murder.
So you guys walk up when the cab's filled with black smoke.
You can't even see them in there.
It's just like, they'll come out eventually.
Yeah, you can't even see them in there. You wonder, just how dumb can you be?
Yeah. Well, you can be dumb. People can be dumb. That's for sure. All right. So the enforcement piece is a big piece, making sure people follow regulations. But that, again, coming back to reintroducing and developing regulations around grizzlies and wolves, that's something that you were part of with both of those, right?
Yeah. Our director knew that I was working at the legislature at the time. He directed me to do that, and that I had a pretty good rapport with quite a few legislators. And so when the wolf recovery thing came about, the feds said, we're bringing them, play ball with us or we'll run over the top of you. So the first thing we did is we formed a committee of lovers and haters and ag people and ranchers and the whole schmear. And the first thing we did was to create a area where wolves could live in Idaho. And it was from Idaho City to the Canadian border, but not anywhere below Idaho City. So the freeway essentially was what we used coming across the state, nothing below there. And
this is back in like 1994.
Yeah, back in those days. And so then the Fed said, we're bringing the wolves and we're going to be bringing them on X date. Well, so we had to develop a management plan, and they told us they were coming in a year before they did. So we worked for 9 months on a management plan, and you've got people that couldn't even stand to look at each other when they came into the committee, but then they formed friendships and understood the other person, and we came up with a very, very good management plan. And so we had to have it okayed by the Senate. So we all got together and went over there. And as we walked in, the Cattle Association double-crossed us and told the legislators they weren't going to support the plan. And because ag is such a big deal in Idaho, the plan went south. And so immediately the Fed said, if you don't let Fish and Game have it, we're going to give it to the Nez Perce Indian tribe. And so the Nez Perce ended up with the money and the management of wolves. And what they used for a management plan was my plan, and everywhere it said Idaho Fish and Game, they wrote Nez Perce Tribe. And Montana did the same thing. They took our management plan and wrote Montana where it said Idaho in it, and used that plan. But because of the turmoil with the cattlemen, we couldn't use it. The money went to the Nez Perce tribe. 8 years later, instead of having 150 wolves like you were planned when we could start having a season on them, we had 1,800. And elk and deer were dying like flies. Areas are being closed to hunting. And a whole bunch of ag people are all upset because they're killing their livestock. Well, by then, the cat's out of the bag. And we now kill about 350 to 400 wolves a year in Idaho through hunting, through trapping, and through natural mortality. And they raise about 350 a year. So we haven't been able to do much to get the numbers down. They're down from about 1,800 down to 1,400, but that's a lot of wolves. And a wolf eats a deer or an elk approximately every 7 days. So you got 1,400 of them every 7 days, because if you have a pack of wolves, they're going to each eat a deer a week. And so they did have an impact, but now what has changed is the elk that used to be sitting out in the great big meadows, like in Bear Valley or in Stanley or any of those great big meadows, a wolf can catch them, and they'll run them down and catch them. Well, the elk then moved into the heavier timber with blowdown and all kinds of stuff, and a wolf can't catch them. And so they're in thicker timber, so the people that used to harvest them out in the open aren't getting any more because they're not there. And then what they've done is, because the wolves follow them into their wintering areas, they're coming further and further south. Like out of Boise on the way to Mountain Home, halfway there, if a guy takes a left and goes out a couple miles, there's 3,000 elk down there every year. They're wintering on the flat where there's people around, and they aren't being attacked by predators. So a mountain lion in the sagebrush or a wolf in the sagebrush aren't very effective. And so that's where the elk go. And you have to hunt them in different places than you did before, because they're not in the big meadows. If you want to go up there, you can watch the scenery, but you're not going to get anything.
Sure. So with that thing, so that obviously had an impact. You were telling me about one particular area where the elk essentially got eliminated as the wolves moved out of there because they no longer had that big game. The elk populations regrew. What was that area?
That was in the Salmon River drainage, the East Fork of the Salmon River. And when the elk numbers started to diminish dramatically, the ones that always were coming in there, and we would see 1,000 a year when we're hunting, and then it would start dropping and dropping and dropping. And I'm pretty sure there weren't any elk. And the ones that lived moved because there was wolves there, and the ones that didn't got eaten. And then after they had taken care of the elk, they started moving into livestock areas, and that didn't sit real well. So here comes the feds with a helicopter, and they killed them all. And 10 years later, none have come back there, and the elk herd is huge again.
Gotcha. So there's been a lot said. A lot of people have talked about, hey, look, statewide elk populations are doing just fine. You know, there are more elk here than there ever have been. And then other people are saying, well, that doesn't really do me any good because the elk are either in areas that I can't actually go and hunt them, or they're on private land that I don't have access to. So there are problems where it's like, hey, look, in localized areas, if wolves continue to exist there, areas that people can gain access to either because of like topography or just because of ownership, as long as the wolves stay there, the elk likely won't come back.
That's true, and that is an unfortunate thing about the elk can get on private property. For example, there's a guy that Prosser Mellon is his name that owns Mellon Banks, and he's bought about 100,000 acres in Idaho, and has made it very lucrative for the elk to make a living there, and nobody else can hunt it. Well, now what the elk are doing is they go out at night and rape and plunder in the Weiser River Valley on crops, and then go back in there to the no hunting area where there's 1,000 of them or so in there, and you don't have an opportunity to get them. And so therefore what happens is then the Fish and Game has to pay for the damages, and the damages they're pretty horrendous. When I wrote the bill to start the damage program, we had 50,000 in it, and now I believe it's $500,000. And in some winters that's not enough because there's elk that you can't get at that do a ton of damage. And that's one of the things, like you say, that people get frustrated with is, look at all those elk over there, and I don't have a chance to get one. Right. Well, you can't force somebody to let you onto private property, but what we have put in the law now is if you have elk on your property and you don't allow reasonable hunting, then you can't collect any money.
So you can't charge an admissions ticket if you're not allowing reasonable hunting from the public.
No. But what happens now in some of the really large areas where there's a tremendous value in these huge bull elk, you can't sell these tags because landowners get a certain number of tags to take care of the problem themselves. And it started with they could take cows, calves on their own property, and then legislature got involved, and then it was cows, calves anywhere in the unit, and then they got a little more involved, and then it was bulls, cows, and calves on private land, and now it's bulls anywhere in the unit. And those are highly prized tags now, and they sell trespassing privileges for $20,000 to $50,000, and the tag is free. The tags that Fish and Game give them for free, and that's how they get around that. So people that are well heeled are going to these areas. Bennett Mountain is a very good example on the way out of Mountain Home down towards Glens Ferry. Probably the second biggest elk in the state live there, but you got to pay a fortune to get one.
God, man, that's really rough. So what is the average hunter left to do then? If you have predominantly accessible areas because of topography that are now wiped out from elk because the elk have either moved on or died, and then you have private landowners who are essentially making a habitat that's very favorable to these large animals, so they hang out there, and you can't afford that. Like, what's the average person supposed to do?
Well, it's really interesting with a GPS unit or Onyx maps. There are landowner tags given out on the Mountain Home Desert there, and that isn't as lucrative as the big ones on Bennett Mountain. So they will give those to people that these landowner tags, and those people can come shoot one. Well, a lot of the other landowners won't accept a landowner tag from another person. So you go out there with your Onyx and you do binoculars all day, every day, until you see elk move out of that land and go onto a piece of BLM. Then you sneak over there and shoot one. That's the only way you're going to get one there, because most of the land is private. And once you've shot one or two on a guy's private property, they leave and go over there where they're not going to get shot, and you can't get in there. But I had several friends that have onyxed the area now, and they know exactly where they are. And once they see the elk move across, they're going to sneak up on them and try to get one. But we're still killing 23 to 25,000 elk a year, so it isn't that bad. But it is for the people that wanted to hunt areas that they used to hunt all the time, where private landowners would let them in. Well, now that's not happening. But one of the things that we started on is we currently pay about 300,000 acres of private land. We pay the landowners a fee to open that to public hunting. And when the elk are depredating on their property, causing problems, it costs them money. And so now we can pay them to let people go in there and hunt and get those animals. And it increases in the amount of money we're able to give out every year. And we're getting more and more land opened. And that way they have a better chance of getting an elk.
Man, it's very complex.
It's complex.
Very complex. I was speaking with a friend the other day who was saying, he said, look, I didn't start hunting. He's a younger guy like me. And he said, I think he was 2000, 2001. He said, I didn't start hunting at all until 2000, 2001. So I don't really know anything different, but the points you're making that I've heard a lot of people make is, hey, I was hunting here in 1985. I was hunting here in 1990. It used to be a hunter's heaven, and it was very accessible, and you could get as many opportunities in elk as you want. You didn't have to go like way up into the mountains or into these heavily wooded areas. Those people seem to be the ones that are most upset about it. And again,
they had to change where they were going to go hunt.
Right.
And if you wanted to go to the high up in the mountains, there's not going to be any elk there, or you're not going to get them because they're in real thick timber, and they got good ears and good eyesight. So you're not going to get them unless you're very lucky. You have to go to lower areas with probably more quaking aspen and a few pine tree areas, and that's where they're going to be. Southeast Idaho, where I cut my teeth with Fish and Game, gosh, you go east of Idaho Falls, and half of the land is covered with big, huge aspen groves, and elk feel pretty comfortable inside those. So that is an area where they've moved out of the high country and they come down into there. And then when they come out to get something to eat, a lot of that is federal ground, and you have a chance at them. But you can't go up high and expect to get an elk. You're not going to do it.
So wolves are one major predator that got reintroduced and supported. Grizzly bears also, though. talk to me about grizzly bears, because that's not really an animal that most people are like, oh, we really need to, protect our grizzly bears.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because wolves get all the credit, but the number one predator on elk is black bears. And they are very, very good at getting the babies. For example, we radioed 50 calf elk in an area up by Orfino, and in 2 weeks there were 3 left alive. Because a mama elk will go to a meadow and have her baby and then keep it right on the edge of the meadow. Well, black bears have learned that's where they are, and they wipe them out. And so some of those areas where you have high black bear numbers, you're not going to have any elk, and the wolves don't live there because there isn't anything to eat. The next predator is a mountain lion. And then wolves take third, but they get all the credit.
Well, it seems that I think the frustration that people had was we had eliminated the third place, right? There wasn't, the wolves weren't here competing, right? And then like you added in somebody who made it into the top 3.
Well, then you spoke about grizzly bears.
Yeah.
I was the head of the grizzly bear recovery committee, and the recovery committee for grizzly bears. You're about as popular as.
You really know how to pick them, man.
But that was another thing where if you didn't do something, then the feds were going to do it for you, and it's not going to be as favorable as if you do it yourself. So we've tried to live with grizzly bears, and we've tried to warn people about where, if you're hunting, that there could be grizzly bears there. And they're smart. They've learned, especially just over in Wyoming, when they hear a gunshot, they come a running because they know there's a dead elk and they're going to run you off it. And they take elk constantly from people after they've shot their elk, and are trying to. We tell people in some of those areas, if you shoot an elk, you have somebody stand there with a gun ready to go while I'm cleaning the elk out, because they have learned to come in and they're pretty aggressive. Well, there aren't hundreds of thousands of them. And, one time we had a legislator from Midvale that she said that she saw a truck go over up on Midvale Hill and saw a fish and game truck dump 12 wolves there. And we're going, oh, come on. And then with grizzly bears, these people said they saw a truck coming through, a 18-wheeler coming through Mackey that said Yellowstone Grizzlies on the side, and they were taking them out of Yellowstone and running up and dumping them out. And first off, if you got 18 grizzlies in there, that thing is going to be rolling. Yeah. There's going to be one alive by the time you got where you were going. And then how do you catch 18 grizzlies? I told them,
and why do you put a giant banner on the side of the semi saying Yellowstone Grizzlies?
Yeah,
like, who's doing that?
I told the legislators that that would empty our grizzly hatchery if we put 18 in there. And they said, "You've got a grizzly hatchery?" And I said, "No, but doesn't that sound kind of foolish that would be on the side of the truck?" Right. But nobody ever gets a license plate number. And so, you put up with a lot of that.
So what is the issue with trying to help recover the grizzly bears, and why recover them?
Well, because they're an endangered species, and the Endangered Species Act says that you will recover them in areas with good habitat. And so they recovered the peregrine falcon and recovered the bald eagle and the American alligator with this law. But some of these big predators, the law still says they have to be recovered, but that's a lot dicier because I'm not afraid of a wolf, but I personally choose not to hunt in areas where there's grizzly bears.
Right.
But if they bite me, I'm going to bite them back. Those grizzlies are in trouble because I got big teeth.
Yeah, but my dad lived up in Alaska for about 25 years and he went, black bear hunting and stuff, and went hunting on Kodiak Island and whatnot. And it's not a joke. Like, you have to be exceptionally careful. The few times I had any kind of even remote engagement with real wildness up in Alaska, it was like, oh, this is not funny. Like, this is really bad news. And again, exceptionally dangerous. So where are the areas then that grizzly bears function the best in Idaho? Are they exceedingly rural areas, or are they somewhat populated?
No.
Like, how have the populations dealt with it?
Mainly, the grizzly bears have moved out of Yellowstone Park, and there's another 100-mile circle around that now where there are grizzly bears. And so Island Park, southeast Idaho, has quite a bunch of them. And then the other bunch is in the very top end of Idaho, above Bonner's Ferry in that country. There's lots of them there. They're coming in from Canada and they're reproducing there. And some of them are coming over from the Island Park area, but they're very, very few in the Salmon River drainages, the Payette River drainages, a little more in South Idaho, and then up through the Selway and that country, you're going to start seeing grizzly bears. And there's more every year up until they get to the number. It used to be like there were 200 grizzly bears in the lower 48. Now there's like 2,000. And one thing that we took care of is in those areas with bears, you use bear-proof trash cans and dumpsters and everything else, and you don't allow them to eat things, or you don't feed them, because once they've lost their fear of humans, they're dead. It's the same with the black bear. If you feed it and it becomes your friend, it's dead because it's going to get into trouble.
Right. What is the distinction between behaviors and environments between a black bear and a grizzly bear that has allowed the black bear to thrive, whereas a grizzly bear was really getting driven out?
Well, I think that they always were there together. And a black bear will run like mad and it can climb a tree. And so they were able to live in grizzly areas, but grizzly bears kill animals and they kill wildlife and then they kill livestock. So they were extirpated by the people who lived in those areas, and they were gone up until about 20 years ago. If you ever saw a grizzly, it would be something really unusual. Well, now in the Island Park area, people don't even really bother because they see them often enough that it's not uncommon anymore.
And the brown bear, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and again, I'm not a bear expert, obviously, but the brown bear and the grizzly bear are actually the same bear. They're just living in different environments. One's getting berries and foraging, and one's just getting a glut of like salmon, right?
Yeah, they're a little bit different. They're both in the Ursus family, which is bears, and grizzly bears are Ursus. And I can't pronounce it correctly, but horribilis. Well, they're horrible, and they scare me. But I feel better knowing that they're here. We just need to learn to live with them, and if you are in danger with one of them, then it's okay to shoot it, but you can't bait for grizzly bears like you do for black bears. Throw bait out there and lure them in. But if a grizzly bear comes there, you better not shoot it because you're going to jail.
Yeah.
And you have to know the difference. And the biggest difference is the big hump on their back.
Right. And that's the grizzly has the hump, right?
Yeah.
It's like a camel hump.
See, but a black bear can be any color. I've seen them that are almost white to jet black and every color in between.
So just look for the hump.
Just look for the hump. And if there's a hump there, get up the tree or leave it alone.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're a thing. You were part of the design of the depredation program in Idaho, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what we're talking about now, especially with wolves and grizzlies, is protecting things or reintroducing things that humans that exist here really may not like. And it may actually, aside from just disliking the idea that there might be a grizzly, you are dealing with something that might be affecting people's livelihood. You know, and you have this, I was talking to Charlie Justice actually recently, and he was telling me about the bunny bashes, where it's like you have farmers and they like collect all these bunnies and bash them to death. Because,
you know, I lived there during that period of time.
Okay, the Jackrabbit Bunny Bash, did you participate in one of these?
No, but we would go out and get a 500 around one of those little cubes of bullets and sit on a haystack, and an hour and a half you're done. You've shot all your bullets. It was something that is so unbelievably unbelievable that you could be riding down a road and just thump, you're running over them. And I remember one time there's a guy that called from Chicago, and he wanted to know how many rabbits I thought he could get in a Volkswagen Beetle to take home. But well, it depends on how tight you push them in there. Man, I got to come out there and get me some rabbits. And then people trapped a whole bunch of them, and they sent them clear over to Italy for game farms for people to hunt these rabbits. But it wasn't unusual to push a field and push them into a corner and have a couple thousand rabbits there, and people then go in and just beat the crap out of them. Oh, it was a classic. You've never seen anything like it, but tens of thousands of millions of them. All of a sudden, one year there were none, and millions the next year.
Yeah, because they obviously have no self-control with reproduction. So they ramp up and then they starve, and then the next year it takes them like a year to get back to recover.
Yeah. It was also interesting. We had a guy that for $1 million would pray them away. And another guy said for like a couple million that he would bring up seagulls from Salt Lake, and the seagulls ate the crickets in Salt Lake and saved their crops. Well, he was going to teach the seagulls to eat bunnies, and that they'd be gone then, but only for $2 million.
Only for two, just a quick two.
Yeah.
What's $2 million between friends? So we've been managing people or animals rather, because bunnies are listed as a predator species in Idaho, which I found so hilarious. So, but it's because they attack people's livelihood. They are a real problem. So what is the relationship or how is the relationship going with trying to help people manage, wolves and grizzlies and not be too upset about it when they're raising livestock and farming and things of this nature?
Well, what we did is we came up with there's a person whose job it is to work with landowners and farmers and people who have livestock and whatever in every region of the state. So there's 7 of them, and there's a pretty big budget for that, where they can pay for fencing, or they can pay to surround your haystack with panels or whatever you need to try to do that. And then if you can't do it and there's still a monetary loss, we have the money to pay for that. But now I see in the legislature, just in the last few days, they finally, for the first time, have quit depending on Fish and Game to pay for these, because wolves belong to everybody in Idaho, and they're breaking Fish and Game by saying, or a grizzly bear, they're saying that they're getting damaged by them. We don't have enough money to pay it. So now it's going to come out of the general fund for the first time. What happened when they first did that bill, they put $500,000 in the thing, and the rules were no rules. There was no, you didn't have to prove that you had a damage, and you could wildly exaggerate what you had, and there was no penalties for lying. And that money went out so quick you wouldn't have believed it. And so now there are people that are called in if you have damage from wolves, grizzly bears, black bears, mountain lions, or whatever, and they will take a look at it, and if it is true, then they will get paid for their losses. But you can no longer just say, we got a guy out of Arco that claimed 12 tons an acre of hay on dry ground, where the maximum you would ever get is 2 to 3 tons. And we had to pay him for 12 tons. And we had another guy that the sheep herder said that he saw a white dog running around out through the sheep where they were lambing, and it ended up, when they count them, it killed 93 sheep. Well, it was a white dog, and the guy didn't speak English, so one of our officers spoke Spanish and went and got the whole story from him, filled out the paperwork. Well, then later, several days later, the owner of those sheep came over and changed it. You could see where he wrote white dog, scratched that out and put mountain lion, and got $16,000 out of us. And so there was people who were lawful and doing what was right, and then there was others that would do that because the money was free and there was no penalty for lying.
What's the penalty now?
You just don't get paid.
You just don't get paid.
Yeah, you just don't get paid if you have
so
a
you just
valid
lose
claim.
Time. You're not at risk of losing money or getting
No,
fined.
most people are honest about it, and they'll tell you what they have. But when anything is free and there's no penalty for lying, then when we started this program, it was a disaster.
Yeah. Well, it's a bad way to hand out money, man. Yeah. People just have to say something's happened. Again, where do we go with Fish and Game? Because you have people that trust it and recognize there's a place for it. You have people that don't trust it at all, that feel very disillusioned by what they feel has happened with the wolf reintroduction and Fish and Game's participation, even though it was the Fed that brought that in. You know, Fish and Game in Idaho.
Well,
just
the fish is enough like Fish and Wildlife Service, so they think that you're the crook.
Right.
But from all the surveys that I've ever seen, well over 90% of the people in Idaho have a favorable opinion of Fish and Game. But you have that element that is very unfavorable on any kind of government, and they're very unfavorable with Fish and Game. And for example, with me, we had a sporting goods store here in Idaho where I watch these guys get down on their knees and take their plugs out of their guns, put everything back together, and go out and they shot 10 times, 2 of them. And it was the owner of the store and their RFD manager. And they were so upset that how dare I write them tickets, because what they did, they thought they were above the law. Well, they started an organization to get me and to get me fired, and they ended up with several hundred people in there that were calling my phone, telling my 8-year-old daughter that they were going to kill me and she'd never have a dad again. And I mean, it got really nasty.
Classy people.
Yeah, and the director refused to fire me because obviously there was nothing going on. But that's sometimes you get that element that when you give them an opportunity, they take it. And it was not unusual for me to get a nasty, nasty, nasty phone call. And in those days, there was no way to trace it. So you wouldn't, and they call in the middle of the night. And I remember one time my father-in-law was dying, and so in the middle of the night, if the phone rang, we answered it, and it would be one of the people at 3 a.m. yelling at you and whatever. And it was pretty nasty. They ruined my life for a year.
What happened at the end of it? Did they
just got tired of it? They just got tired of it, and their store went bankrupt because they were running anti-fish and game podcasts in there all the time, and people didn't like that, and they quit going there. So they ran themselves out of business by being
they were running an anti-fish and game podcast
in their store.
Wait, how long ago was this?
Oh, that's been 20 years now.
Wow, they were early adopters of the podcast, man.
They told me that they moved to Idaho because we had a pure form of John Bircher than they had in Minnesota. And that's why they moved here. And so they carried that hate for any kind of government. And then how dare I write them tickets? And so, I mean, it was a nightmare.
Yeah, what a weird thing. I have heard from people that a lot of individuals moving here, especially to northern Idaho, have a very specific idea about what freedom means in Idaho, and how they have an idea that moving to the state is going to allow them to, essentially engage unmolested or unregulated by government completely. Is that something you would think is reflected in your fish and game experience?
Well, yeah, I think so with that certain group, because they don't like government. And so they don't like the rules and regulations. And so they will do everything they can to either damage you or just try to get their way. I mean, we had a group that we started taking some of these really mouthy people that were swearing there was no game out there anymore. We would take them on flights to go out and count animals, and then we would make them sign when they got out of the helicopter that this is how many they saw. And the next week they're back at it again saying that was a law, and that was a lie. And we forced them to sign their name, and they're back at it again because it's just, there's no answering that type of person.
Right. Do you think that type of person has increased in population or decreased?
Oh, increasing dramatically.
Okay, but hang on. And I'm not saying you're wrong, because I don't know, but I feel like the number of people that are, I don't want to say bad actors, but frustrated and repeating the same sentiment over and over and over. Like there's no game anywhere and it's all dead. They are just amplified now. So we think there are more of them, but in reality, it's like, no, it's like, 2% of the population is going to be upset or 10%.
Let me give you a thing about that. Cecil Andrus, the beloved governor of Idaho, that was the finest governor we've ever had, when people would write to the governor and whatever, he'd send a note over and we'd tell him what the real story was. And he would just shine them off. Well, when we got Governor Batt in, the first day of the legislative session, he introduced legislation to fire me as I was the chief of the Information Bureau then, and I would be the only person in Idaho that could be fired without cause. So that was the first thing. And then they called me in and told me to shut up about grizzly bears on my radio show. And then he made it known that if anybody has any problems with Fish and Game, I will listen to them now. And they came out of the woodwork by the thousands. With the same complaints that Andrus had just shined off because they weren't valid. Now they have somebody that'll listen. And we had to hire people to actually take care of these letters and answer the phone from all the ne'er-do-wells that had complaints from years and years and years ago. And we had thousands of them. It was just crazy what happened during that couple, 3 years after we got a governor who wasn't wildlife friendly.
When you talk about the radio show, were you doing the Fish and Game radio show?
Mm-hmm.
And that was in the 90s, wasn't it?
In the 90s, the governor, he slashed our budget for the newspaper, our little tabloid, the radio show, and the TV show. He slashed the budget on all of those and stopped them because you have to put your budget into the governor's office. Then they tell you whether you can run your budget at the legislature. And he took all of that out and said that's propaganda and people don't need to know that.
So it was my understanding that it didn't just get defunded, but there was some sort of legislation that prevented you from having that level of mass communication. They
just took the money out from it.
And then
he called, well, for example, the governor called the head of KTVB and told him that you will not air their their TV show anymore. And did the same thing with KTVB, and then he did the same thing with our radio channels. And I have a very popular radio show, and we would discuss topics and bring people in on important things, and then take phone calls. That was propaganda, so he got rid of it.
Gosh, man, that's really unfortunate. And that was again in the late 90s.
Yeah, and we've never had a radio show since.
Gosh, that's unfortunate. Because specifically because I think, especially with all the topics I hit, education, law enforcement, politics, Fish and Game, one of the biggest things you can do to help, as we become more polarized, and you've seen this everybody's seen it over the last 20 years. The country and our communities have just become incredibly polarized. And as we've reduced communication down to these little sound bites that are very tasty and delicious and awesome to watch and share in 20 seconds, and I can't believe they're doing this and blah, 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 blah. The only solution that I've seen since I've been I graduated from college in 2004. So essentially the last 20 years have been kind of like, what do we do with this? And in the last 10-ish years, it's become very clear that the only answer to those types of things is presenting compelling, valuable conversations to the public.
Educate them as to what's going on, because you hear all the time all these crazy stories. Like a guy that's working on my boat the other day told me that Fish and Game intentionally planted walleye in Lake Lowell and are lying about it now. And I'm going, oh, stop. And
stop.
What we were doing is we were planting tiger muskie, which is a muskellunge and a pike, and they come out with weird stripes on them, and they're not fertile. They're like a mule. They can't reproduce. And we put several thousand of those in Lake Lowell because we have over 2 million adult carp in there and trying to get the baby carp. Well, he said he'd heard from a Fish and Game employee that the that Fish and Game brought these tiger muskies in, but slipped in a bunch of walleyes because they came from the same hatchery. Well, I went back to the fisheries manager and said, "What's going on here?" And he said, "We individually handle each tiger muskie and put a coated wire tag in their nose. And then we can follow every one of those muskies out there in the water. And so we've handled every fish. So there was no way we would get a walleye in there because we're handling tiger muskies." So they just make up stuff like that and then tell the public, and they buy it. Well, if you had a show like a radio show, we would have had, that would have been a topic to explain why, and especially why we don't want walleye in Idaho, because we are a salmon and steelhead state, and they are a terrific predator. And I've seen a walleye, a big one that was taken in Lower Snake. It had 27 baby steelhead in it. In their stomach. So they're a terrific predator on our salmon and steelhead, so we can't have them in those areas. And so there'd be no way in the world that a Fish and Game anybody would put walleye in Lake Lowell.
Right. And again, that's exactly my point, which is, hey, these things are complex, and I think there's a desire from the public to actually have valuable content and valuable conversations. You just have to present it in a way that works with people. And predominantly,
the tabloid newspaper, we put them in every place that had sold Fish and Game licenses, and it explained all the stuff that was going on and why this and why you did it and how you're doing it. Then the magazine was a beautiful magazine. It had a large number of subscriptions and explained it in more detail. All of the you would explain why we're doing this kind of deer hunting here and what we're trying to achieve and what the results are so far. And that went by the wayside, so the public couldn't get notified there. Then they got rid of my radio show, and so the public really doesn't have any way now, and you're muzzled. You better not say this or that. And we have a wildlife-friendly governor now, but the previous three were very, very anti-government and anti-Fish and Game, and it just made our job exponentially harder because they catered to the people that hate government and don't care what you tell them, or they know they're lying. But what I've found is the dumber you are, the louder you are.
Oh my God.
And with our legislators, that's the truth.
Well, don't look down on me for having a podcast, please.
No. You're not running out and screaming that we've killed. I'll give you an example. These guys came to their legislators who would believe anything because they were anti-Fish and Game, and said that they found a pile of 2,000 dead elk where Fish and Game had machine gunned them and then took them out onto the Fish and Wildlife headquarters, which is about 40 miles out of Idaho Falls, and stacked them up out there. And they have pictures, but they wouldn't let Fish and Game see the pictures. But we had a big hearing with 100 people there about machine gunning elk, and 2,000 of them, and nobody saw it. And so, I mean, how would you believe that in the first place? Well, what it was, when we finally got to see the pictures, is antelope over there in really, really bad weather, where there's railroad tracks, they go through cut banks, and the antelope will lay in there, and a railroad train comes by, and they won't move. And this was pieces of about 70 antelope that we picked up and took out there because they were rehabbing wildlife there, like bald eagles and so on. And they were going to feed them those.
Yeah, sure.
So they flew over it and took a picture of that, and that turned from 75 antelope
to 2,000
machine gunned elk. And people were believing that. I mean, it just staggers you to think they would believe that. And another one is sage grouse. They always flew where they were and scared them away the day before season opened. And so when people would tell me that, I'd say, well, can you tell me where away is so I can go get them? Because they must have scared them all away, because there's none here where I'm hunting. I mean, give me a break. Scared them away.
Away to where?
I want to know where that where is.
You and me, Pat. You and me. Listen, You're the best. This is great. I had a bunch of questions. We went above and beyond. This is going to be the first of many if you ever agree to come back, which I hope you do. But I got to let you go now. Do you have anything that you'd like to say in closing?
Well, I'd like to just say that that fishing game is not just a job; it's a lifestyle. And when you take that on, and you love wildlife like I did, that I left a thing in school teaching that I truly loved, because wildlife and Idaho Fish and Game was my lifetime desire. I love wildlife. I loved helping people with wildlife, and that the people that work in fish and game, they're not in it for the money. They're in it because they love wildlife and they want to do the best for wildlife, regardless of what it is. And there isn't any of those people out there that are trying to destroy wildlife or do things like that. If there was ever someone like that, they're gone. People that work there, they do it because they love what they're doing, and nothing made me fonder than going to a public meeting.
Is that your ringer?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a turkey?
Yes, I'm a turkey hunting fool.
Is that how you got to know? Well, I don't even. You know Burke Mantell, right?
Gosh, yeah, very well.
Yeah, he's the turkey guy.
So anyway, to get back to that for just a second. Yeah. Nothing pleased me more than to teach hunter ed, or to talk to a group about elk hunting or how to turkey hunt or do whatever, and to take pride in what you do. I mean, I took pride. I got up every day and said, I get to work with wildlife and I get to work with people and hopefully do the best I can every day of my career. And I've been gone for 18 years now, and I still feel that way. And like somebody tells me that they're intentionally putting fish in there, and I went directly from that down, and I knew the answer in 30 minutes. Because it made me mad. I'm going, you shouldn't be saying stuff like that, because it's not true.
Right. And it doesn't help. No. It doesn't help anyone.
So anyway, turkeys, there's 6 types of turkeys in North America, and none anywhere else in the world. And so I have 5 of the 6 types, and the last one is the ocellated turkey. Excuse me. They live in the jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. So next spring we're going down to Belize, and I'm going to go over there and hunt turkeys in the jungle, and then I will have the World Slam, and I'll be known as Mr. Turkey.
God, give me a call when you're doing that, please, because I don't get out much, but I may have to do that. That's incredible. Well, Pat, thank you for coming out today.
Okay.
I have learned so much today on and off air. You got to come back. We got to keep this party going.
Oh, I would do it. I hope I don't offend anybody, but I tell the truth.
Yeah.
And so if you want to know the truth, whether you like it or not, it's the truth.
God bless it. Thank you, sir. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.